Isabella believed the weight of the moment was hers to command. The heavy oak conference table, the silent city skyline visible through the panoramic window, the two lawyers flanking them like seconds in a duel. It was all scenery for her victory. Her voice, usually a carefully modulated instrument of social grace, was now sharp, a shard of ice. "Sign it, Alex, or I take everything, the house, the accounts, the investments. I will leave you with nothing but the clothes on your back. My father's lawyers will see to it." Alexander looked not at her, but at the sheath of papers spread before him. Clear's throat. His hands were perfectly still, resting on either side of the document. He had designed buildings that touched the clouds, structures of steel and glass that reshaped skylines. Yet in the 10 years of their marriage, Isabella had made him feel as small and insignificant as the preliminary sketches he would crumple and toss away. She saw him as a moderately successful architect, a man whose quiet competence provided a comfortable but not spectacular backdrop for her ambitions. She thought his greatest creation was the life he had given her. She was wrong. His greatest creation was the man she thought he was. Within 3 minutes, a single signature would detonate the foundations of her world. He picked up the pen. It was a simple, unadorned fountain pen, Clear's throat, one she had often mocked as plain and beneath him. It felt cool and solid in his hand. He looked at her then, meeting her triumphant, unblinking stare. There was no pity in her eyes, only a chilling finality. He had seen that look before. When she dismissed a waitress for a minor error, when she cut off a friend for a perceived social slight, when she looked at him after he'd tried to share a passion for a new project she deemed unimpressive. It was the look of someone swatting a fly. He felt a deep hollow ache, not of fear, but of mourning for the man he had tried to be for her and the woman she had never become. He uncapped the pen, the small click echoing in the tense silence, and signed his name with a steady, deliberate hand. He pushed the papers across the table. Isabella's lips curved into a tight, satisfied smile. Victory. She glanced at her lawyer, a bulldog of a man named Peterson, who nodded grimly. But then a strange thing happened. Alex's lawyer, a woman named Evelyn Hayes, smiled. It wasn't a polite, professional smile. It was wide, genuine, and utterly devastating. It was the smile of a player who had just revealed a royal flush. Isabella's own smile faltered. Confusion flickered in her eyes. Why was she smiling? This was Isabella's moment, her triumph, the culmination of her father's power and her own ruthless will. The other lawyer's smile was an unwelcome intrusion, a discordant note in her symphony of success. She didn't know it yet, but the ink on that signature wasn't a surrender. It's Faraz. It was a declaration of war, and she had just handed him the terms of her own unconditional defeat. I hope you're settling in for this, because the story of how we got to this moment is one I think you'll want to hear. If you're enjoying it so far, do me a favor and hit that like button, Clear's throat, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from today? It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. Now, let's go back. Let's go back to the beginning of the end. The end began not with a bang, but with a toast. It was at a dinner party in their sprawling minimalist home. A home Alex had designed. Every line and angle a testament to his philosophy of light and space. But to Isabella and her guests, it was merely a stage. She stood at the head of the dining table. A crystal glass of champagne held aloft. She looked radiant, her dress a shimmering column of silver, her smile as bright and hard as the diamonds at her throat. To my brilliant husband, Alex, she announced, her voice ringing with what sounded like affection, but was to him the clear tone of condescension. He's just landed a new project, a lovely little community library. It's so quaint. A polite ripple of applause went through the guests. A curated collection of her father's business associates and her own socialite friends. Alex felt the familiar heat rise in his neck. Quaint. She used the word like a weapon, diminishing his work with a single perfectly aimed syllable. It wasn't a skyscraper or a luxury resort or a corporate headquarters. The only kind of architecture that registered as significant in her world. It was a space for people, for books, for quiet learning. To her, it was a hobby. Her father, Richard Sterling, a man whose presence filled any room with an aura of immense unassailable wealth, chimed in from his seat. "That's wonderful, son," he said. The word son, a courtesy he never seemed to mean. Good to keep busy. Keeps the mind sharp for the important things. He gestured around the room, like making sure my daughter has a roof over her head. The laughter was immediate and hearty. Alex was the punchline. He was the court jester in his own castle. He forced a smile, a practiced mask he had worn for years. He knew what they saw, a decent, slightly plodding man who had married far above his station. Isabella Sterling was a prize, and he was the quiet, unassuming caretaker. They had no idea that the Sterling fortune, while considerable, was a static pool of old money, expertly managed but not growing. They had no idea that the quiet architect at the end of the table was the silent river feeding that pool, keeping it from stagnating. He felt a light pressure on his arm. It was Sarah, the wife of one of Richard's partners. Her eyes were kind, her smile apologetic. "Don't listen to them, Alex," she whispered, leaning close. "I think a library is a wonderful, noble thing to build." Alex gave her a genuine, grateful smile. "Thank you, Sarah. I think so, too." Isabella's eyes narrowed from across the table. She didn't miss the exchange. She hated when others showed him the respect she so consistently withheld. It challenged the narrative she had constructed, Snort's the one where she was the sun and he was a minor planet orbiting her brilliance. Later that evening, as Alex stood on the terrace overlooking the city lights, Richard joined him. The older man lit a cigar, the smoke pluming into the cool night air. "You're a good man, Alex," Richard began, his tone paternal and deeply patronizing. "You make her happy. You provide. It's a respectable life." "I do my best," Alex said, his voice neutral. "But you have to understand Isabella," Richard continued. "She was raised for more. She has appetites for the best things in life. The house, the parties, the travel. It takes a lot to maintain this. A hell of a lot." He paused, taking a long draw from his cigar. "Her trust fund helps, of course, but it's not infinite. Your income is the day-to-day. You need to be thinking bigger. That's all I'm saying. Stop with these passion projects. Chase the money. It's the only thing that's real." It was the same speech he'd heard a dozen times. To Richard, a building wasn't a piece of art or a functional space for human beings. It was a column on a ledger. Its value was measured only in profit margins, in prestige. He couldn't conceive of a man who would choose to build a library when he could be building a casino. Alex simply nodded. "I'll keep that in mind, Richard." Inside his pocket, his fingers found the smooth, cool barrel of his fountain pen. It was a gift, not from Isabella, who favored flashy brand name items, but from a client, an elderly Japanese businessman named Kenji Tanaka, for whom Alex had designed a serene, minimalist retreat in the mountains of Kyoto. Mr. Tanaka was the head of one of the world's largest and most innovative tech corporations. He had sought Alex out personally, not through his public F-facing firm, but through a discreet network of high-level contacts. The pen was a symbol of their mutual respect, an object of perfect, understated craftsmanship. It was worth more than the car Richard drove, but its value was in its story, not its price tag. Holding it, Alex felt a sense of calm settle over him. They could mock his little library. They could patronize him and measure his worth in square footage and dollar signs. They were living in a world he had built for them. And they didn't even know the name of the architect. They saw the facade and it was so convincing they never thought to look at the blueprints. That was his greatest design. And soon the demolition was scheduled to begin. The cracks in the facade widened with the arrival of Marcus Thorne. He was everything Alex was not. Loud, ostentatious, and dripping with a kind of new money that screams for attention. He was a hedge fund manager who spoke in a rapid-fire staccato of market trends and leverage buyouts, his teeth impossibly white, his tan perpetually fresh from a vacation Alex had undoubtedly paid for. Isabella was utterly captivated. She had met him at a charity gala she'd insisted they attend, and within weeks, Marcus was a constant presence in their lives. He would appear at their home unannounced, always with a bottle of absurdly expensive wine, clapping Alex on the shoulder with a familiarity that felt like an invasion. "Alex, my man," he'd boom. "Still building your little bird houses?" Isabella would laugh, a high tinkling sound that grated on Alex's nerves. "Marcus, be nice," she'd say with no intention of him being so. "Alex is an artist." The word artist was pronounced as if it were synonymous with impoverished dreamer. The second great humiliation occurred during what was supposed to be a quiet weekend. Alex had been working on the final renderings for the library, a project that had become his sanctuary. The design was innovative, incorporating natural light and sustainable materials to create a space that felt both grand and intimate. He was proud of it. He was trying to explain the concept of the central light well to Isabella, hoping for a flicker of interest when Marcus strolled in dressed for tennis. "Still at it, Chief?" Marcus said, peering over Alex's shoulder at the screen. He squinted at the complex schematics. "Looks complicated. You know, I just financed a new skyscraper in Dubai. Pulled a 17% return on initial investment in 6 months. We're talking 9 figures. Now that's architecture. That's finance." Alex corrected him quietly, not looking up from his work. "You financed a building. You didn't build it?" Marcus chuckled a dismissive guttural sound. Clears throat potato potato. "It's all about the money, Alex. You should know that. How much is this little library of yours even worth? What's the budget?" "A few million." "The budget isn't the point," Alex said. "The budget is always the point," Isabella interjected, siding with Marcus instantly. "Don't be so naive, Alex. Marcus is trying to help you. He understands how the world works." "Is that what I'm doing?" Alex asked, finally turning to face them. "Being naive a little," Isabella said, her expression softening into a look of pity that was more insulting than her anger. "You live in your own world of blueprints and aesthetics. It's charming, but it's not reality. Marcus lives in reality. My father lives in reality." The unspoken addendum hung in the air. "And you, Alex, are just a guest here." Later that night, unable to sleep, Alex came downstairs for a glass of water. The pocket doors to the living room were slightly ajar, and he heard voices. Isabella and Marcus, their words low and conspiratorial. He stopped, his hand on the cool banister. "He just doesn't get it," Isabella was saying, her voice laced with frustration. "He has no ambition. I've tried to push him to get him to leverage his name to partner with a big firm, but he's content with his little projects." "It's a shame," Marcus replied, his voice smooth as silk. "A woman like you, you should be on top of the world, not worrying about the income from a boutique architecture firm." "The income is fine," Isabella said, a defensive edge to her tone. "We live well." "You live well now," Marcus corrected. "But what about the future? What about a real legacy?" "My world, Izzy, is about growth. Constant aggressive growth. What you have with him is maintenance." There was a pause. "When you leave him," clears throat Marcus said, his voice dropping, "you need to make sure you're secure. Your father's people are good, but they're old school. I know guys, Specialists. They can strip him down to the studs. Make sure you get what you deserve. Alex stood in the shadows of the hallway, his heart beating a slow, steady rhythm. He felt no shock, no surprise, only a profound, chilling clarity. He had known this was coming. He had seen the subtle shifts in her behavior, the growing distance in her eyes, the way she looked at Marcus with a hunger she hadn't shown him in years. He had hoped, perhaps foolishly, that the foundation they had built, however flawed, would hold. But he was also a pragmatist, and an architect always has a contingency plan. He backed away silently and went not to his bedroom, but to his home office. He unlocked a drawer in his desk and pulled out a simple unmarked folder. Inside were the business statements for a holding company named Athelred Holdings LLC. It was a deliberately bland, forgettable name. The statement showed a portfolio of assets that would have made Richard Sterling's eyes water. Commercial real estate in Tokyo, equity and tech startups in Silicon Valley, and controlling shares in material science companies that were revolutionizing the construction industry. At the bottom of it all was his primary source of income, his salary and profit sharing from Athelred Designs, one of the most exclusive and sought-after architectural firms in the world. A firm so discreet it didn't have a public F-facing website, working only with clients who came through trusted referrals. A firm of which he was the founding partner and principal designer. His own small local firm, Alexander Vance Architecture, was real. It handled projects like the library. It was his passion, his creative outlet and the perfect cover. It generated a respectable six-figure income, enough to fund their comfortable life, but not enough to arouse suspicion. It was the facade of the building, beautifully designed and impeccably maintained. But Athelred was the steel superstructure, the hidden foundation that held everything up. He closed the folder and picked up his phone. He scrolled to a contact named Evelyn Hayes. He had hired her 8 years ago, 2 years into his marriage, when he first saw the dangerous glint of entitlement in Isabella's eyes. Evelyn was the best asset protection lawyer in the country. He typed a short message. "It's time. Let's get the final paperwork ready." He received a reply almost instantly. "It's been ready for years, Alex. Just say the word." Alex looked out the window at the sleeping city. Marcus was right about one thing. It was time for some aggressive growth. But the portfolio he was about to grow was his own freedom. The ambush came as he knew it would on hallowed ground. Sunday dinner at Richard Sterling's estate. It was a weekly ritual, a command performance where Alex was expected to sit quietly while Richard, Isabella, and now Marcus discussed the grand tapestry of their lives. That Sunday, the air was different. It was thick with a cloying predatory energy. They waited until after the main course. The plates were cleared and the port was being poured. Richard cleared his throat, a theatrical sound that commanded immediate silence. He looked at Alex, his expression a mask of solemn paternalism. "Alex," he began. "Isabella has something to discuss with you. We all feel it's best to do this as a family." Alex met his father-in-law's gaze and simply waited. He didn't fidget. He didn't speak. He just waited. His calmness seemed to unnerve them. It wasn't the reaction they had anticipated. They expected anxiety, confusion, perhaps fear. His stillness was a blank wall they couldn't find a foothold on. Clear's throat. Isabella took a deep breath, steeling herself. She slid a thick leather-bound folder across the table. It landed in front of him with a soft thud. "I want a divorce, Alex," she said, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "I see," Alex said. His voice was even, betraying nothing. "It's not working." "It hasn't been working for a long time," she continued, gaining momentum, as she recited the lines she had clearly rehearsed. "We want different things. I want to live. I want to grow. You're content. You're happy in your small world, and I can't live there anymore. She deserves more. Marcus chimed in, placing a proprietary hand on Isabella's shoulder. She deserves a partner who matches her ambition. Someone who isn't afraid to play in the big leagues. Alex ignored him completely. His focus remained on Isabella. And what is it you want, Isabella? He asked, his question simple and direct. This was her cue. She opened her own copy of the folder. It's all in there. The settlement agreement. It's comprehensive. She gets the house. Of course, Richard stated as if it were a foregone conclusion. My daughter will not be made homeless. It was a wedding gift after all. A lie. Alex had paid for the down payment in every mortgage payment since from his small firm's earnings. And the joint accounts, Isabella added, her voice hardening. The art collection, the cars. My legal team has advised me that given the disparity in our family backgrounds in my contribution to your social standing, this is more than fair. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. She had reframed her relentless spending as an investment in his career. The parties, the clothes, the vacations, all were now being presented as sacrifices she had made for his benefit. You've been a decent husband, Alex, she said, delivering the final condescending blow. And for that, I'm not going to touch your business. You can keep your little firm. You can build your libraries. It's all I'm leaving you with, but it's enough for you to live on. It's a generous offer. Sign it and we can both move on cleanly. The list of grievances. Here it was, not from his side, but from hers. A meticulously crafted narrative of his failures, his lack of vision, his inability to satisfy her. He listened as she detailed his supposed shortcomings, his preference for quiet nights in over lavish parties, his disinterest in schmoozing with her father's dull associates, his passion for his work, which she framed as an obsession that excluded her. Each point was a distortion of the truth, a twisting of his character into a caricature of a boring, unambitious man. He let the silence stretch after she finished. He looked from her defiant face to Marcus's smug smirk to Richard's stony glare. They were a united front, a pack of wolves that had cornered their prey and were waiting for the final satisfying kill. Alex slowly reached for the folder. He didn't open it. He simply rested his hand on the cool leather. You've put a lot of thought into this, he said, his voice still unervingly calm. Clear's throat we have, Richard confirmed. This is what's best for everyone, especially for you, Alex. A long, drawn-out fight would be ruinous for you. We have the resources to keep you in court for years. You don't. It was the final threat, the ace they thought they held, the power of the sterling name and fortune against his meager resources. Alex looked at the folder, then back at Isabella. And this is your final word? This document? It is, she said, lifting her chin. Sign it or we proceed and my lawyers will take everything. I promise you that. Alex nodded slowly. A long, deep sigh escaped him, a sound of profound finality. It was the sigh of a man closing a book he had read one too many times. All right, he said. Have your lawyer send a copy to my lawyer. We'll arrange a time to sign. He stood up, placed his napkin neatly on the table, and looked at Isabella one last time. There was no anger in his eyes, only a deep, penetrating sadness that seemed to see right through her. I hope you find what you're looking for, Isabella, he said. Then he turned and walked out of the room, his footsteps silent on the thick Persian rug, leaving the three of them sitting in a stunned, triumphant silence. They had won. They were sure of it. They had no idea they had just walked willingly into the most elegant trap he had ever designed. And so we returned to the conference room, the city sprawling beneath them, a kingdom Isabella believed she was about to inherit. The signed papers lay in the middle of the table, a testament to her victory. She watched Alex and his lawyer, Evelyn Hayes, stand up to leave. The smile had not left Evelyn's face. It was beginning to grate on Isabella's nerves, a tiny dissonant detail in her perfect victory. "What are you so pleased about?" Isabella snapped at Evelyn, unable to hold back her irritation. Evelyn paused, her hand on the door. She turned, her gaze sweeping over Isabella, then Marcus, then Peterson, her own lawyer. Her smile didn't waver. "Pleased," she said, her voice calm and clear. "I'm pleased because my client is a gentleman and because he just did you a tremendous life-altering favor." Peterson, Isabella's lawyer, shifted uncomfortably. He was a good lawyer, but he was a bulldog, not a strategist. He was built for frontal assaults, not for the kind of intricate, multi-layered game Evelyn Hayes was known for. He sensed something was wrong. "What are you talking about, Hayes? This is a standard settlement. In fact, it's incredibly generous to your client's wife." "Oh, it is a settlement," Evelyn agreed, stepping back toward the table. Alex stood by the door, watching, his expression unreadable. "And it is generous, just not in the way you think." She tapped the document with a manicured finger. "You see, this document your client so forcefully insisted upon isn't a divorce agreement." A flicker of alarm crossed Peterson's face. "What do you mean?" "Of course it is." "No," Evelyn said, her voice dropping slightly, drawing them in. "The quiet bomb. This is a formal acceptance of the terms of a postnuptial asset separation agreement. An agreement, I might add, that your client signed 3 years ago." Isabella stared at her blankly. "A postnup? We never signed a postnub." "Oh, but you did," Evelyn said smoothly. She slid a different document out of her own briefcase. It was thin, just a few pages. "Do you remember 3 years ago when Alex's firm, Alexander Vance Architecture, was incorporated? He told you it was a necessary legal step to protect your shared assets from any potential business liability. A formality. You signed it in his office. You barely glanced at it? You were in a hurry to get to a spa appointment, I believe." Isabella's mind raced back. She had a vague memory of it. Alex had presented some boring business papers, droning on about liability shields and corporate veils. She had been annoyed at the imposition, scrawling her signature quickly so she could leave. "It was just some business thing," she said dismissively. "It was a business thing," Evelyn agreed. "It was an agreement that formally designated Alexander Vance Architecture and all its income as Alex's sole and separate property. But more importantly, it also designated any and all other business ventures, holdings, and income streams derived from his professional activities, whether known or unknown to you at the time, as his sole and separate property. As well." Peterson lunged for the document Evelyn had produced. His face grew pale as he read it. It was impeccably drafted, ironclad, and Isabella's signature was right there at the bottom, clear as day. "So what?" Marcus scoffed, trying to regain control. "He keeps his dinky little firm. We know that Isabella gets the real assets, the house, the portfolio." Evelyn's smile returned brighter than ever. "Ah," she said, "but that's where you've made a critical error in your assumptions. You've been looking at the wrong firm." She paused, letting the weight of her words fill the room. "My client, Alexander Vance, is the founding partner and principal designer of Athelred Designs." The name landed in the room like a physical blow. There was a sharp intake of breath from Peterson. Even Marcus, for the first time, looked utterly clear's throat stunned. Richard Sterling, who had been listening from a speakerphone on the table, let out a choke sound. Athelred Designs was a name whispered in the highest echelons of global business and finance. They were the architects of the impossible, the secret research labs for tech giants, the private island compounds for billionaires, the stunning gravity-daying headquarters for sovereign wealth funds. They took no credit. They gave no interviews. Their client list was the most exclusive in the world and their fees were astronomical. That's not possible. Isabella stammered. Alex, he runs a small firm in the city. He does. Evelyn confirmed. Alexander Vance architecture is his passion. It's the work he does for love. Athelred Designs is the work he does for a living. All of its income for the past 10 years has been funneled into a premarital trust. A trust you, Miss Sterling, waived any claim to in your prenuptial agreement because you and your father deemed its initial assets, a paltry $50,000, as insignificant. The memory hit Isabella with the force of a physical impact, the prenup. Her father's lawyers had sneered at the small trust Alex had insisted on protecting. They had seen it as a sign of his small-mindedness. A boy from a middle-class background trying to protect his meager savings. They had advised her to let him have it. A small concession to make him feel important. Evelyn continued, her voice relentless and precise. That insignificant trust now holds assets valued at just over $900 million. The house you live in, it was purchased by the trust. The art on the walls, the cars in the garage, all purchased with funds dispersed from the trust and are therefore the trust's legal property. Your joint accounts have a current balance of negative $200,000 due to your rather enthusiastic spending which my client has been diligently subsidizing with his declared income from his small firm. She gestured to the papers Isabella had forced him to sign. This document you were so eager for him to sign, it separates your marital assets from his personal ones. It affirms the terms of the postnub. He has just legally indemnified himself from all your shared debt and protected his $900 million fortune from any and all claims. He keeps his assets. You keep yours. You wanted to take everything. Miss Sterling, the problem is you don't actually have anything. What you thought was your life was merely a temporary residence and the lease has just expired. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the silence of a collapsing building. The moment after the load-bearing walls have turned to dust, just before the roof caves in, Isabella stared at Alex, her face a canvas of disbelief, horror, and dawning, sickening comprehension. The quiet, unassuming man she had tolerated, mocked, and planned to discard was not the man she thought he was. He was a giant and she had been living in his shadow completely unaware of its scale. I signed, Alex said, his first word since the revelation. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the silence like a surgeon's scalpel. Just like you asked. The facade of Isabella's composure finally shattered. It didn't crumble. It exploded. No, she shrieked, the sound raw and ugly. No, you can't do this. We were married for 10 years. I am entitled to half. Peterson, do something. Peterson, her bulldog lawyer, looked utterly defeated. He shook his head slowly, staring at the postnub Evelyn had provided. His documents are ironclad, Isabella. The prenupub, the postnub. You signed them. You waived your rights. There's nothing I can do. Then I unsign it. She screamed, lunging for the settlement papers on the table, her manicured nails scratching at the page as if she could physically tear her signature from the paper. I take it back. It doesn't work that way, Evelyn said, her voice calm and soothing, the kind one uses on a hysterical child. It's a legally executed contract. Witnessed final. She gestured to the two junior lawyers who had been sitting silently in the corner. Both our paralegals witnessed the signing. Marcus, who had been silent and pale, finally moved. He wasn't looking at Isabella. He was looking at Alex with a new horrifying kind of respect. He was a numbers guy, a predator who understood strength and weakness in purely financial terms. He had miscalculated on a colossal scale. He had hitched his wagon to a woman he thought was a ticket to old money prestige only to find out she was a financial black hole. And the man he dismissed as a nobody was the one holding the entire universe of their wealth in his hands. This is a trick. Richard Sterling's voice boomed from the speakerphone, tiny and laced with fury. "This is fraud, Vance. I'll have you disbarred. I'll sue you into oblivion." Alex finally turned his gaze to the speakerphone. "On what grounds, Richard?" he asked, his voice devoid of emotion. "That I was more successful than you thought. That I protected my assets as your own lawyers advised you to do with yours. I disclosed the existence of the trust in the prenup. Your legal team dismissed it as irrelevant. I presented the postnup as a standard corporate shield. Your daughter signed it without reading it. There has been no fraud, only your own arrogance and willful blindness." Marcus slowly backed away from Isabella's side. The proprietary hand was gone. His expression was one of cold, hard calculation. He was already severing his losses. He saw the future. Isabella, stripped of her assets, embroiled in debt, her social standing about to evaporate. She was no longer an asset. She was a liability. "Isabella," Alex said, his voice softening for a moment. "I am not leaving you with nothing. Your personal belongings are yours. The jewelry I gave you, the clothes, the car in your name. You also have your trust fund from your grandfather. It's not my fortune, but you won't be destitute." It was a small mercy, but it felt like the cruelest insult. Her trust fund, which she had always considered a nice supplement, was now all she had. It was enough to live comfortably, but not enough to fund the stratosphere of luxury she considered her birthright. It was a cage, and she was just now realizing she had spent her entire life decorating it, thinking it was a palace. "I gave you 10 years of my life," she sobbed, tears finally streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. "No, Isabella," Alex replied, his voice filled with a decade of quiet sorrow. "You didn't give them to me. You spent them. And now the bill has come due." He turned to Evelyn. "I think we're done here." They walked out of the room, leaving behind the wreckage. Isabella collapsed into her chair, her sobs echoing in the opulent conference room. Peterson stared blankly at the papers. Marcus was already pulling out his phone, likely canceling his dinner reservations with Isabella for the rest of eternity. And Richard Sterling's enraged sputtering from the speakerphone was the only sound that followed Alex out into the hallway. He didn't look back. An architect never looks back at a demolition. He looks forward to the clear ground where he can finally build something new, something true. The days that followed were a study in consequences. The first to fall was the house. Within a week, a polite but firm letter arrived from the legal entity that managed Alex's trust, informing Isabella that the property was to be vacated and put on the market within 30 days. The home she had treated as her personal kingdom. The stage for her social triumphs was revealed to be a rental and her lease was up. Walking through the cavernous echoing rooms as movers packed her personal belongings into boxes felt like a nightmare. The art was taken down, leaving pale rectangles on the walls. The custom furniture was inventoried. Every object she had once paraded as a symbol of her status was just another asset being reclaimed by a trust she hadn't even known existed. The second consequence was Marcus. He didn't stage a dramatic exit. He simply evaporated. His calls went unanswered. His texts received curt one-word replies and then nothing. The final brutal severing happened at what was supposed to be her life raft. A charity luncheon she had shared for years. She arrived expecting the usual fawning and air kisses, but the atmosphere was cool. The whispers followed her as she moved through the room. News, especially bad news, travels faster than light in her social circle. She saw Marcus across the room holding court, laughing with a younger, wealthier Aaes. Their eyes met for a moment. There was no apology in his, no remorse. There was only a cold, reptilian assessment. He gave her a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head, a clear and final dismissal. He had done his due diligence and found her to be a bad investment. The most devastating blow, however, came from her own father. She retreated to the Sterling estate, expecting to be sheltered, to have her father unleash his army of lawyers as he had promised. Instead, she found him in his study, a glass of scotch in his hand, his face a thunderous mask of rage. But the rage, she quickly discovered, was not directed at Alex. It was directed at her. "How could you have been so stupid?" Richard roared, slamming his glass down on the desk. $900 million. Do you have any idea what that is? It's a dynasty. It's generational power and you had it in your hands. You were married to it and you were too blind, too arrogant to see it. He tricked me, Isabella cried, falling back on her only defense. He didn't trick you, Richard bellowed, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. He tested you. He laid a trap for your greed, and you walked right into it, dragging the family name through the mud with you. You had one job: to keep your husband happy, to secure that fortune for this family, and you couldn't even do that. Instead, you brought that peacock Marcus into his home and pushed him away. It was the ultimate betrayal. Her father, the man who had molded her, who had taught her that status and wealth were the only things that mattered, was now berating her for following his own lessons too well. He wasn't angry that she had lost her husband. He was furious that she had lost access to his money. She was no longer his prized daughter. She was a failed business merger. In that moment, staring at her father's apoplectic face, Isabella understood the cold truth of her world. She had never been loved for who she was, only for what she represented and what she could acquire. Alex had tried to love the person underneath the ambition. Her father had only ever loved the ambition itself. The final humiliation was the most mundane. Her credit card was declined at her favorite boutique while trying to buy a dress for a party she was no longer invited to. The young sales clerk's polite, pitying smile was more painful than Marcus' cold dismissal or her father's rage. It was public. It was small. It was real. She had no house, no partner, no social standing, and now no credit. She was adrift, stripped of everything she had used to define herself. The woman who had confidently told her husband she would leave him with nothing was now the one who had nothing left. 2 months after the signing, Alex received a call from a number he didn't recognize. It was Isabella. Her voice was small, stripped of its usual imperious tone. She asked if they could meet, not to argue, not to plead, but just to talk. He hesitated, then agreed. He chose the location, a quiet, unassuming coffee shop downtown, far from the glittering restaurants she favored. She arrived looking diminished. She wore a simple dress. Her hair was pulled back and she wore almost no makeup. The armor was gone. She looked like a stranger. They sat in silence for a long moment before she finally spoke. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why did you hide it all? Was it all a game? A test to see if I would fail?" Alex took a slow sip of his coffee. He had thought about this question for years. "No," he said, his voice gentle. "It was never a test. It was a hope." She looked at him confused. "When I met you," he explained, "I saw this incredible, vibrant woman. But I also saw that you had been raised to believe that your value and the value of everyone around you was tied to money and status. I fell in love with you, Isabella, the real you. I caught glimpses of when you weren't performing for your father or your friends. And I had a choice. I could have shown you the money and you would have loved it, but I would have never known if you truly loved me." He leaned forward, his eyes sincere. "So, I built a world for us, a good world, a comfortable life based on what you thought I was, a moderately successful man. I hope that in that world, away from the pressures of your father's expectations, you would find that it was enough. That I was enough. I hoped you would grow to love the life we built, not the life you thought you were entitled to." He sighed, a deep weary sound. I kept waiting for 10 years. I kept waiting for you to see me, to see the man, not the provider, to take an interest in my work because it was my passion, not because it paid for your shoes, but every year you drifted further away. You saw our life not as a home, but as a stepping stone. And when Marcus came along, I knew my hope was gone for good. You didn't want a partner, Isabella. You wanted an acquisition. Tears welled in her eyes, but for the first time, they seemed genuine. They weren't tears of rage or self-pity, but of real, dawning grief. Grief for the man she had never bothered to know. Grief for the love she had thrown away in pursuit of something that was never real. The library, she whispered, a memory surfacing. You were so proud of it? I was, he said. I am. It's for the community. It's a space where a kid from a background like mine can go and discover the world. It's real. It's the kind of work I always wanted to do. I called it quaint, she said, her voice choked with shame. I know, he replied softly. They sat in silence again. The chasm between them was vast, filled with the ghosts of a decade of misunderstandings and missed opportunities. I am not a monster, Isabella, Alex said finally, breaking the silence. I never wanted to destroy you. I only wanted to protect myself. He slid an envelope across the table. It was the same gesture she had used at her father's dinner, but his was an act of grace, not aggression. Clear's throat. This is from me, not the trust. It's a settlement. It's not a fortune, but it's enough for you to get a fresh start, to find a small apartment, go back to school if you want, to figure out who you are without the sterling name or my money defining you. She stared at the envelope, then at him. Why would you do this? Because for a long time, you were my wife, he said simply. And because I still believe that somewhere inside you is the woman I fell in love with. Maybe now she'll finally have a chance to find her way out. He stood up to leave. Goodbye, Isabella. She watched him walk out of the coffee shop and disappear into the crowd. She was alone with nothing but an envelope and the crushing weight of her own choices. For the first time in her life, she had no one to blame but herself. It was a terrifying feeling. But underneath the terror was something else. Something she hadn't felt in a very long time. A flicker of possibility. The possibility of starting over. The possibility of becoming someone real. A year later, the city skyline had a new addition. The Westgate Community Library opened its doors to the public. It was a stunning piece of architecture, not for its scale, but for its humanity. Light flooded the interior through a soaring atrium, illuminating rows of books and quiet reading nooks. Children's laughter echoed from a brightly colored wing, Clear's throat, and students sat hunched over laptops in sun-drenched alloves. It was a building that breathed. Alex stood on the mezzanine, looking down at the people filling the space he had created. He wasn't in a tailored suit, but in jeans and a simple button-down shirt. He looked younger, lighter. The weight he had carried for a decade was gone. Evelyn Hayes stood beside him, holding 2 plastic cups of sparkling cider. To the quaint little library, she said, her eyes twinkling as she handed him a cup. Alex laughed, a real unburdened sound. To the library, he agreed, clinking his cup against hers. It's the best thing I've ever built. I don't know, Evelyn said, looking at him. I think the man who built it is even more impressive. He gave her a grateful smile. His life was different now. It was quieter, more authentic. He still ran Athelred Designs, of course. The projects were still massive, the clients still powerful, but his heart was here in the spaces he built for people, not for profit. He had found the balance he had always craved. On the other side of the city, Isabella Sterling. No, she was Isabella Vance now, having quietly taken back his name, not as a claim, but as a reminder, locked up the small art gallery she now managed. It was a modest place, showcasing local emerging artists. Her work was fulfilling. She was good at it. She had an eye for talent, something she had never realized when she was only focused on acquiring famous names. Her apartment was small, her car was sensible, and her friends were few but loyal. They liked her for her sharp wit and her surprising kindness, not for her social connections. She had dinner with her father once a month. The meetings were strained. He still couldn't comprehend her lack of ambition, her contentment with a small life, but he was trying. Slowly, glacially, he was trying to see his daughter instead of a failed investment. Sometimes late at night, she would look at the check Alex had given her. She had never cashed it. It sat in a drawer, a symbol of the choice she had made. She was building her own life on her own terms. It was harder, but it was hers. She was no longer a reflection of a man's wealth or a father's ambition. She was finally just Isabella, and she was discovering that was more than enough. The story of Alex and Isabella is a powerful reminder that true worth is not measured by the size of a bank account or the grandeur of a house, but by the integrity of one's character. Arrogance builds walls, while humility builds bridges. Alex built a world of hidden strength, not to deceive, but to seek a truth. Isabella, in losing everything she thought she valued, was given the chance to find what truly mattered. In the end, it wasn't about revenge. It was about revelation. The revelation that the most impressive structures we can ever build are lives founded on respect, honesty, and a quiet, unshakable sense of self. It's amazing. What do you think? Was Alex right to hide his wealth for all those years, or did his silence contribute to the problem? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective is what makes this community so special. And if this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more tales of justice, redemption, and the surprising strength of the human spirit. Thank you for being here with me today. Until next time.